Richard Skipper celebrates. Every show is a celebration. Each show, Richard delivers the artists you love, showcasing what makes them unique. Never gossipy. The antidote to a sometimes hectic world. Now, here's your host, Richard Skipper.
Happy Sunday, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Richard Skipper Celebrates. I don't know where you are watching this show today, but if you're here in New York, it is a rainy, dreary Memorial Day weekend. But thank God we are still able to get out now, if you've been vaccinated, and fully be with our friends, our families, and our loved ones. I am very excited about today's show because I am going to be bringing on the show Richard Barrios, acclaimed film historian and author. We are going to be talking mostly about his incredible book here, Screened Out, which I have not been able to put down since I started reading the book. We are right on the brink, on the precipice of Pride Month, and I'm sure that this year, more than ever, people are really going to be celebrating because last year at this time, everything shut down. We were not able to go out and do the things that we wanted to do. There were no Pride parades. And even this year, the Pride parade is going to be virtual. But I'm sure I can speak for Richard when I say this. We need to celebrate Pride within each and every one of us. And we need to be the leader of our own parades, and we need to get out there and we need to celebrate each other. And Richard, I want to thank you, first of all, for being here today. And I want to ask you, this is a Sunday afternoon, 3 o'clock. The curtains would be going up if our theaters were open about this time.
Right.
And today marks 442 days since our theaters shut down. And I want to ask you, before we delve into your book and other aspects of your life, how are you doing really in the midst of this crazy world we find ourselves in?
I find that I've been doing actually very well, surprisingly well. I live in a small town on the Delaware River in western New Jersey. I also have a geriatric cat sitting on my lap, which was not planned, but right when you signed on, she jumped on.
Cats have a tendency to do that. Now, I do want to let you know, I am still getting a little bit of an echo. I think that your speaker is a little too high. So if you can bring that down, your volume will be a lot better.
Okay, how's that? Is that better?
That's a little bit better, yes.
Okay, I can't turn it down more than that, otherwise I won't be able to hear you.
And you have to hear me.
I have to hear you.
We'll work this out in the editing room, so this is great.
Okay.
But you were saying that you're living in a small town on the Delaware River.
I live in a very small town on the Delaware River, across from Philadelphia, in western New Jersey. And it's a small community, but I have terrific neighbors, and we've kind of been there for each other in all of this. So the isolation has not been as intensive, maybe, as it is, in the city where people were, and sometimes weren't even allowed or permitted to go out of their apartments. So it hasn't been that bad here. Plus the fact, as a writer, I work at home anyway. So I've been able to engage in a few projects here. I find that I'm very, very fortunate in that I didn't have some of the really, really terrible restrictions that a lot of other people did. So for me, it hasn't been as bad. I like to watch movies at home anyway, so I've done a lot of that. And I'll look forward to the theater when that is more of an option.
Now, you are a writer, and I know that for many, writing is a solitary life. Although you don't do it alone, your acknowledgments in your book is a full chapter in itself. And I read through it 3 times because it was so moving to me. All of the people that you truly acknowledge, adding to not only your life, but to the book itself. And I thought it was an incredible opener to your book and getting to know you a little bit better through that. I want to ask you, have you always been a writer? When did you first realize that you have this gift?
I always liked writing. Even when I was a kid, I would write plays and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I was very fortunate. My aunt, who was also my godmother, was my town. I grew up in a very, very small town in South Louisiana. And my aunt was the town librarian. So she encouraged me at a very early age. And I'll also never forget the time that she pulled off the shelf for me the library's one and only book about movies. And of course, I devoured it. I think I was 9. So it started with that. And I really cast around a lot, trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up, even when I had grown up. I started out as a theater major, but I realized I probably didn't have the ego stamina to withstand that. So I'm right before graduating, actually, I moved from theater to music. I play the piano, and I ended up getting a degree in just regular music, piano, and then a master's in music history and literature. Now, by that time, I was living in Houston at the time, and I had met a friend who was really, really into film, which I always was, but never really knew anyone who shared it to that passionate, an extent. Mm-hmm. And sort of under his guidance, I decided to move to New York to study film at NYU, specifically with the late, great film historian William K. Everson, who sort of eventually became kind of like a surrogate father to me. So I did that, and I did a thesis, a master's thesis at NYU on the Broadway melody and the birth of the musical film, mm-hmm. Which I felt went very well. And I always had it kind of in the back of my mind to eventually one day extend that into a book, because I had done a fair amount of research. But reality intervened, and I went to work actually in the music publishing business for a while. But I always had that book kind of in the back of my mind. And then I had this wonderful friend who, God bless him, he lived just long enough to see the book come out.
That's great.
Named Jonathan Katz. And he was the one who basically goaded me to get back to the book. So I eventually did. And the book was eventually published by Oxford University Press. It was called Song in the Dark, Birth of the Musical Film. And that kind of gave me my grounding. And the thing about Jonathan was he also gave me the idea for the book Screened Out, which was my second book, because he told me he had been watching, I think it was even before Turner Classic Movies, he had been watching TBS. And they ran an old movie one day called Our Betters, film by George Cukor with Constance Bennett. And he said, "You would not believe the queen that comes in near the end." He said, you can't even believe it. And so I had always been fascinated by the idea of gay images in film. Mm-hmm. And of course, we had the book and then later the documentary, The Celluloid Closet. But I started realizing that there were many more of them than were covered in that book. A lot of it, Mr. Russo didn't have access to because they weren't seen for many years. Something like Our Betters, didn't turn up on TV much or anything like that. So I started working on that as my second book, and that eventually became Screened Out.
Now, I want to go back. We're going to go back a little bit in your journey. You're originally from Louisiana.
Yeah, the food's great. The politics,
That's a whole other show. And you can write a book about politics and film, So,
and yes.
There's a lot.
And the intersection of politics and gayness in film. I can start with Advise and Consent. My God.
Yes, absolutely.
That's an amazing movie.
But how did the move happen from Louisiana to Houston? You've pretty much told us how the move happened from Houston to New York. But how did the first leg of your journey happen?
I had always, as a child, starting from around the age of 4, I had always wanted to live in New York. And I grew up literally on the bayou, right out of the swamps, in a very small town. So even going to New Orleans was a big deal. But I had wanted to go to New York. But I was also, as an adolescent and even a young adult, a fairly terrified individual. So it took me quite a bit of doing to sever those ties. And I figured I would do it in easy stages. And I had a friend of mine who had moved to Houston. So which is still driving distance from where I lived and all that. So I moved there, and no offense to any viewers who live in or from Houston. It was clear to me after not all that long that it was not going to be a place where I wanted to spend much of the rest of my life. So after I got my master's at the University of Houston, I determined to do what I had always wanted to do since I was, this big, which was to move to New York. And I lived in New York for 20 years and enjoyed it very much. I eventually left. I was ready for, a house and a yard, but I still have a great fondness and many friends who live in the city. Hi, all you friends who are still in New York.
How long did it take you to get acclimated to feel that you were a New Yorker?
Not very long. It happened fast.
May I ask you what year it was that you moved to New York?
1984.
Okay, I came in 79.
Yeah. Okay. And almost immediately I started doing things like going to the Metropolitan Opera. And then soon after that, going to see old film at the Museum of Modern Art. And I was studying film at NYU, and actually while I was doing that, I did an apprenticeship they were just setting up the Museum of the Moving Image in Astoria in Queens. And I actually did an apprenticeship there, so I was kind of there for that. So the two things that sort of meant the most to me in my heart, well, two of the things that meant most to me, I was around from very early on. So that really helped me to really feel, part of the city. And I remember one time sitting at watching a film at MoMA. And it was funny because it wasn't a regular movie. It was a kinescope of a television show. But it was one of those things that, this was long before YouTube or anything. So you wouldn't have seen it anywhere else. And I remember having a moment where I felt I am right where I am supposed to be. And that's a really, really good feeling to have. And every once in a while, we will get these little flashes, I think, that we're with the people we need to be with, or we're watching the movie we need, anything like that. And these are the blessings, I think, that keep many of us going.
Now, I want to focus on two of the aspects of your book. The book came out in 2006. You mentioned earlier the celluloid closet, Vito Russo, which most of us knew about, and but as you said, was very incomplete. You decided early on, and you talk about this also in your introduction, to focus on the films from Edison up into Stonewall, Obviously, even at the time that you're writing this book, there, the list goes on and on. Cruising, Longtime Companion, all of the films that were out at the time that you were writing the book. What was the deciding factor for you just to cover that time frame?
I thought that essentially the post-Stonewall period had gotten a considerable amount of attention from, let's say, the boys in the band onward. And when I was writing it, that was sort of the age of what was called at the time new queer cinema. What was the movie about Loeb and Leopold? I remember. I can't think of it, but in black and white. Some of those films. And Go Fish, a few of those. And that had been covered pretty well. But I thought especially that there were still many films earlier. I mean, yeah, we knew about a few of them, or, the really important ones, Rebecca, The Maltese Falcon, Suddenly Last Summer, God help us,
Yes.
Some of that. But there were many more that had not been available and that Mr. Russo would have written about had he known about them, but he didn't, and they weren't. And I really wanted that period to be discussed more, because I've always had the feeling that how are we going to know where we're going if we don't know where we came from? And when the book came out, it was not very much covered in the gay press. And I've always said this, that, the Advocate wouldn't even give me a mention, that sort of thing. I'm sorry, but it didn't. And I always felt that if I had been a straight actor who was playing a bi-curious character on a soap opera, they would have given me the cover and a feature story and all this sort of thing. But this was history that happened more than 3 weeks ago. So it wasn't as compelling a topic. It wasn't judged to be as compelling a topic. Whereas I think I love going back and finding not the rumor or the innuendo, but the things that can really be proven. And that's the thing about film. It's there, it's concrete, it's tangible. You know what it is. So that's why I did it.
Do you think if the book came out today that it would have a different, you would have gotten a different response to it?
I have thought about that a lot. I would like to think so. But then, of course, as I've learned, even with subsequent books, the whole book industry has changed so much over especially the last 20 years or so, with the internet and just the changes in media and everything. I've actually thought about doing a second edition of the book. Maybe at some point I will. I was very happy with the way it turned out. I don't feel it was all that terribly well marketed at the time. It came when the publisher was going through a transition, and I kind of fell in the cracks. Now, of course, the thing that really helped it, I think, and I was certainly very grateful, was Turner Classic Movies. In 2007, they devoted a whole month of screenings to the book, and it was called Screened Out Gay Images on Film. And I co-hosted and co-curated the whole programming. And that was wonderful exposure. But even with that, at the time, interestingly, there wasn't a lot of reverb. I would have hoped that maybe my phone would have rang a little more than it did. But
well, this is, trying to figure out is almost impossible. But I want to go back. What are some of the earliest gay images that you remember seeing as a kid? I know also in your book that you focus only on Hollywood. You don't talk really about the foreign films. And you
just a little. Yeah, just a little
bit. But there's not a huge focus on that. You also are not focused on any of the mainstream characters that we saw on television that we grew up with.
No, that's its whole other area.
That's a whole.
Yeah, I could have written about Uncle Arthur or, all that. Now, one thing I did talk about was, because it did connect with film, was radio, because there was a very popular radio show that I remember my mother would tell me about. And it was set backstage in the theater. And sure enough, there was a costumer named Clarence, who was a major character. And when they did a film version of this, it's called Mert and Marge, and they did a film version of it in 1933. And sure enough, Clarence was in the movie, and oh boy, Clarence was quite out there. And so people did have that, which I think is fascinating. But otherwise, I wanted to keep the focus relatively tight. I think the films of, some of the Weimar films, for example, are their whole, they're a book unto themselves. The one German film that I did write about more, because it was such an influential film here, was Mädchen in Uniform, the German film, which was one of the films which really kind of raised the profile of especially lesbian characters in films right before the production code came in. And that movie was hugely popular and influential. But the rest of it, maybe I was being a bit parochial, but I was thinking, as I was growing up, what would have been, if I were in that time, what would have been the films that I went to see that might have had some bearing on my life. And now that I think, I know now, when I was a kid, watching a bunch of times the Shirley Temple movie, Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, and in the last, 10 minutes of the film, here comes Franklin Pangborn as this, and you start seeing him in other movies. And even though you don't, I was not a sophisticated child at all, something's going on here. And you start clicking. And that's the first one that I really remember, and then even seeing the cut version of the Cecil B. DeMille movie, The Sign of the Cross, which now that it's been restored to its full glory is, my God, it's, and then not just for gay images, but for violence and everything else. But that you knew something was going on. So you started seeing, I started seeing, because I stay up and watch, The Late Show, and my parents would get really annoyed at me for trying to get out of, having a full night's sleep, because I was so fascinated to watch these movies. You started seeing that there were these kind of even insidious and very subtle ways of getting these characters and illusions through the system. Clifton Webb in The Razor's Edge, that kind of thing. And you start seeing more and more of them, and you realize, okay, they knew what they were doing. They knew that certain audiences weren't going to understand it, but they understood that there were people who would, and maybe even, and this I realized later, draw some strength from that kind of identification. And even when a character was, only on screen for even a few seconds, it was something, and it meant something, and it probably empowered people.
You also talk in the book about these hidden, messages that were being slid through the cracks, if you will. If you can talk a little bit about that people within, as a person who was late coming out, I was already in my early 20s, and not even thinking about a huge portion of the time before Stonewall. We know about homosexuality being illegal in New York and everything. But
Right.
these messages that were being put through the system by the movers and shakers in Hollywood to those that were sitting in the theaters watching.
When I was researching the book, one of the really fun things I found was an exchange of letters with Alfred Hitchcock and Jack L. Warner. Hitchcock was starting to make Rope. Mm-hmm. And we know what Rope is. It's Loeb and Leopold. It's these two lovers who also are murderers. Mm-hmm. And everybody knew that the play that it was based on was about that. So Jack L. Warner writes Alfred Hitchcock a letter. Please tell me that this is not about what it's supposed to be about. And the thing that Warner was, and I hadn't really as much realized this aspect of Loeb and Leopold, but that was also fuel for anti-Semitism as much as it was anti-homosexuality at the time. You know, mm-hmm. They were seen as being bad exemplars of both of those things. And a letter from Hitchcock swearing to Jack L. Warner, that is not what this is about. It's about murderers, but it's not Loeb and Leopold. It's not homosexuality. And then you see Rope and you say, this can't be anymore.
No.
You know, it can't be, you know, and then to cast it with two gay actors, John Dahl and Farley Granger, I mean, just kind of adds to it, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Well, and also going back, films that you had grown up with, films that you had seen on The Late Show, all of these things. And now, of course, as you go through life and you get older, it happens with me. I'll watch a film and I go, why didn't I pick up on that before?
Oh, yeah.
It was about some of those instances for you personally that as you're researching the book, that things are jumping out at you that you never paid attention to before.
One word, Gilda. And that one is funny because, you know, people have been arguing about it. And even the Glenn Ford himself claimed that he understood what it was about. Mm-hmm. But the director, before he died, claimed, no, it wasn't. And you see it and you go, oh yeah, that's what this is about. But you know, when, I guess I can tell this, it's a little bit out of school, but I guess I can tell it. When I was down at TCM in Atlanta working on the series, mm-hmm. and Gilda was one of the films that Robert Osborne and I co-hosted and introduced. And before the camera turned on us, he was sitting there telling me he could not understand why I would be writing about Gilda. It wasn't Gilda, you know, there was no gay element in Gilda, and, you know, he did not understand. And he did a little of that on camera, but he was really quite adamant about it off camera. Yeah. So, you know, people are going to believe what they're going to believe, I guess. It sometimes is rather remarkable. But, you know, I always say people are willing to paint themselves into whatever corners, you know, they are going to be willing to paint themselves into and work within those parameters. And I think a lot of people go back and will look at these films and say, no, that's not what they meant. No, that's not what they meant. Well, you might not have been one of the people that it was intended for. Yes, it is what they meant. Mm-hmm. And so the messages were always delivered directly from the people who knew what they were saying to to the people who understood them. And of course, there's the very famous example of Charlton Heston and Ben-Hur, and that William Wyler apparently was colluding with Stephen Boyd and Gore Vidal that there was the subtext to the relationship between Ben-Hur and Masala, and that Boyd played it that way, and that and they always said, "Don't tell Chuck, don't tell Chuck," so that Heston never. And then later in his life, Mr. Heston got extremely annoyed about it and said, "No, that's not what it was. That's not what it was." Well, you know, you look at it now and you think, it kind of is. It kind of is. But, you know, Mr. Heston, he of the NRA and all that, had his own kind of very delineated, let's say, way of looking at things. So, and a lot of people do. And especially back then they did.
Now, you also had access to a lot of the original scripts, scenes that were cut from films, everything. What, you know, looking back over that period, was there one holy grail item for you that as you were reading or finding it for the first time, you're going, aha?
One was, and USC in LA has huge stock of, they have all the MGM scripts from, you know, from the golden days, a lot of the Warner Brothers, some of the Fox. I spent a lot of time there looking at scripts. And one of the ones that really surprised me were all the preliminary scripts and treatments for Queen Christina with Garbo, which clearly, and everybody, you know, acknowledges this one, that it does hint at a relationship between Garbo and her lady in waiting, Queen Christina, I should say, not Garbo, and her lady in waiting, and you see them kiss on screen. But to go back and read the scripts, they always intended on this. This is something that, and it was specifically after Mädchen in Uniform had kind of struck a nerve with big city moviegoers, with its, you know, hints of lesbianism. And so it was Irving Thalberg's intention that this always be part of Queen Christina. And you go back and read some of the scripts, and it went a lot further than what we see. But it shows you that they were doing it, and this is what they intended. And if they, you know, if they could, they would.
Well, I want to ask you, from writing this book, what changes within your own psyche have taken place in terms of the way that you look at these films, the way that you look at the actors who played some of these roles, being whether they be gay or straight? What are the perceptions within yourself that have changed?
Well, it's realizing that probably more of the actors were gay than would have ever been discussed at the time. And it was not ever my intention to, when writing the book, to delve that much into their personal lives, especially at that time when there was a lot of innuendo, but there wasn't a lot that was very provable, let's say. Except, you know, cases like Ramon Navarro and William Haynes. But even at that time, I only wanted to talk about it more in how their off-screen lives affected what they did on the screen. And especially with Ramon Navarro, who really was, especially in sound film, really came off a little too, let's say, light to be a conventional leading man. And I think that probably led somewhat to his decline. So there was that. And then just the more I went on, the more films that I saw that we hadn't been seeing for a long time, the more I realized, and this is still ongoing, all of these movies that are still out there that we don't know about, and a lot of them are lost, how much there was of this. And what really brought that home to me was the critic for Vanity Fair, Mr. Lawrence, who was a very respected critic at the time, complaining in the middle of 1933 that nearly all American comedies were at that time containing some mention of homosexuality. Mm-hmm. And this is 1933. This is not, 1997 or something like that. And just something like that is so eye-opening. It makes you realize that there is, all these pockets of minorities' histories that get concealed or swept under the rug. And whatever we can always do to retrieve that, be it racially or all these aspects, and that was kind of mine. And reading what he had written there, and going back and seeing all these films, and I'd have friends call me and tell me I found another one, because there was so much. Mm-hmm. There was a later one that really boggled, and we ran it on Turner Classic Movies. Who would have imagined that this cheesy horror movie from 1957 called Voodoo Island with Boris who would have imagined that this had one of its leading characters was an unapologetic, very attractive, slightly older woman who spends a lot of the movie lusting after the leading lady. And there was no reason for it to be there, but there it was. And you go back and, this isn't the kind of movie that many mainstream publications are going to review. But the trade press, a couple of them caught it and they just said, oh, wow, we weren't expecting that. And it because it's a bad movie and a cheap movie and it just, it doesn't. But then you go back and you look at it and you say, oh, yeah. And it was really important to me to retrieve as much of that as it was possible to do, because I didn't see that a lot of it was getting talked about otherwise. And you don't want to think that this all just sort of started happening with the Children's Hour or, Advise and Consent, let alone The Boys in the Band. But these currents were always there, and they may not have been there always in the most straightforward of ways, but they were there and the intentions were there. And I thought it was very important to emphasize that.
And do you feel, again, you talk about these things in the book, and we want everyone to buy the book. It's still available. But you talk about in the book the way that men are portrayed as, gay men, and the way that lesbians are portrayed as well. And if you can talk a little bit about that.
Well, I hadn't known a great deal, as where men are concerned, especially, about this brief sensation in the early 1930s called the Pansy craze. That was sort of the unofficial name for it. And that was when male entertainers, Gene Mallon was probably the most famous of them, were performing especially in nightclubs. And they became like, the flavor of the month for a couple of years. And they were all gay. And some of them would come out with the very, very stereotypical, with the lip rouge and the makeup and all that, and carry on. Some of them were a little more austere than that. But it was a good representation of how many people, if they thought of themselves as homosexual and chose to live that way, which you'd pretty much almost have to do in a big city at that time, how they would be seeing themselves, or how they would, and we think of it now as a stereotype, but the truth of the matter is that some stereotypes do have roots in a great deal of reality. And this was how a lot of these people presented themselves. And I think especially a lot of men who were on the down low or later, they really flinched from them. And I've, shown the movie Our Betters to people who just go, oh my God, no. But this was part of it. And as shocking sometimes as it can seem. And this was, how a lot of them, and the truth, with some women is the same. What would be called an extremely butch dyke character. And, that's a pejorative term, and I don't mean it that way, but just recently I was rewatching the movie All Fall Down, the William Inge movie that he wrote, that Warren Beatty stars in. And the beginning of the movie is this incredibly butch character with big tattoos on her arms and all that, and obviously not happy about Warren Beatty. And, this is out there, but this was how people who were brave enough to live what they felt to be their truth.
Their authentic.
This was in many cases how they chose to present themselves.
Now I want to talk a little bit about casting, and that sometimes, and I was talking about, to a friend of mine over the weekend who played a gay character on Broadway, for example. He's gay. And the producers and the director wanted him to camp it up even more so. Then there's the flip side of the coin, where you have straight actors that are playing gay characters. Right now, there's a lot of controversy over Halston and the fact that a straight actor is playing him. Can you talk a little bit about your thought process when on the casting choices for playing gay on film?
The one I keep going back to, I think, more than any other, and of course it started in the theater and then it ended up being immortalized, if that's the word, on film, is Cliff Gorman playing Emery in The Boys in the Band. And he was not the only straight actor in the cast, but the cast was minority straight. And here he is as by far the biggest
flamboyant
flamer, most flamboyant character. And for me, he is kind of signaling during a lot of the movie, I am a straight actor playing a gay role, so I can add this extra layer to it.
And you also talk about in the book how he really went on interview after interview after interview, leading with that very premise.
Yeah. And now it's not movies, but it's part of our culture. Later on, I found that to be true with the American version of Queer as Folk, Hal Sparks, who before he did Queer as Folk was more known as a comedian. And I don't think I ever saw Hal Sparks do an interview when Queer as Folk was running where he didn't talk about how much he hated having to do the love scenes. And it was, it was shtick, but it was also an example of a straight actor finding ways where he felt he needed to distance himself from it. And okay, they don't want to be thought of as being gay in real life. What you gonna do? You're an actor. You're supposed to, you're supposed to play anything. Not everybody is going to be as embrace the role with the, some of them do it really, really well. I thought Ewan McGregor, you could make a deal about casting a straight actor in the role, but he kind of didn't take any prisoners in that performance. I thought he was outstanding. I wish the show had the writing and the development of the character had been as strong as I felt his performance was. That's my view on it. I don't think it's ever inappropriate for straight actors to play gay roles or for gay actors to play straight. It's the nature of the casting, and sometimes it works. Going back a little bit, I guess the first actor who ever won an Oscar playing a gay role, I'm thinking, was William Hurt in Kiss of the Spider Woman. It's the first one I can think of. And I remember when I first saw that movie, seeing, okay, he's being very skillful here, but he's also telegraphing that he's a straight actor doing these things, with gestures and all that kind of thing. So, and it was skillful, but I also thought that there was a level of artifice that, even another actor might have made different choices to do it a little less so in that way. So I think that's always kind of with us.
I want to talk a little bit about the cultural implications of gay, straight in Hollywood. I'm from South Carolina. You're from Louisiana. And you and I both know, probably more so than even some of our viewers watching today, outside of New York and California, it's a whole different world. And pray that those in the South, if there's even the slightest implication of someone being gay, it could have hurt their careers. And I remember in the early 90s, especially, there was a big movement to out a lot of actors. And I could understand when it comes to politics, if someone is fighting against LGBTQ rights, for example. But when it comes to a person's body of work and worth, what are your thoughts on, the feelings that a lot of people have? Obviously, you can't change the way people think, but in terms of way they perceive closeted actors that are playing, either gay or straight on film.
Well, as I said, it was really my intention when I wrote the book, not to get into that where I didn't feel it touched on the work. An actor is assigned a role. He or she should bring whatever to it that it can. And the politics of the closet, it's, Lord knows we've seen it get better than it was in the days of, Rock Hudson and George Nader and all that kind of thing. But it's still, there are still, agents are going to tell their actors, it's all right to marry a woman, you can put this, that still happens. And I certainly admire those who are more honest about it than that. At a certain point, the artist and the artist's work, I think, need to be separated out. It was, it's like, I liken some of that to, learning what a, difficult person people thought Bette Davis was off the screen. And but look at the legacy. Look at what she's left. That doesn't have anything to do with her being a nasty person to some people, And I don't mind that there's a separation. I would be happier if a person would be honest about who they are. I don't know how some of them live under the pressure. But it's just a really thorny issue, isn't it? And there isn't
Very
one right way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think. And then you have some people from the past and maybe the present, probably the present, whose sexuality is kind of all over the map. If you go back, I can say this non-libelously, someone like Tyrone Power or Dietrich, my God. It was everybody.
Very good. What is
and I think that there are probably a number of them like that now that and some of them would be extremely libelous, and I think are. So that doesn't get really talked about. But you just hope that whatever a person's inner truth is, they can at least bring it to their work in a constructive and honest fashion. That's
very well said.
The most positive spin I can put.
That's brilliant. It's that's positive, and I love that. But I want to ask you, what is the biggest impact that this book has had on you?
Not always positive. Doing it, I was very, very happy to do it. And I'm very glad that I got a lot of things out there that hadn't been talked about. I love that I got to write about Joy Zell. And if you don't know who Joy Zell is, go watch the Cecil B. DeMille movie, The Sign of the Cross, and watch for the lesbian dance, and that's her. But it was, I have to say, it was a bit disillusioning to me that there wasn't a lot of, it didn't get a lot of attention, and what it represented didn't get a lot of attention. And a couple of reviews I was really happy with because they really did strike. Mm-hmm. They got exactly what I was trying to say, and that means a lot. But I was a bit disappointed. Well, after I did the thing on TCM, and it was a month long, and they publicized it beautifully, and it was, all this. The only follow-up I got at all was Newsweek magazine called me to interview me about, I'm glad you're sitting down, John Travolta in drag in the movie of Hairspray. That's it. And I will say here, I thought Divine did it a lot better, but that's and Harvey did too.
Yes, of course. Wow.
But so I say this so often that I think my friends are tired of hearing it. Very often with some of this stuff, you kind of feel like the tree in the forest that falls and there's no one there to hear it,
Welcome to my world. I
know.
Yes, I know.
Oh, yeah. And it happens, most of my writing, as you know, has been about musicals, and it happens with some of that too. I wish I could have more forums to extol the joys of Jane Russell and The French Line for, bad movie. But anyway.
Well, one last question that I want to ask about this book is, when did you know that it was finished, ready for the reader? Was this a decision that was made by you, or was it made by your editor?
Made totally by me. And I was working. This is funny. I'm glad you brought this up. I had a dinner invitation. Some friends of mine were in New York on the Upper West Side, were fixing dinner and had invited me. It was a Saturday. And I was working, and I don't always write in the evening. My best writing time is in the morning. But I was working on that very last section. And I remember thinking, I'm on to something. I can't drop this now. So I called them, I'm sorry, keep it warm. I'm going to be late. And I ended up being like an hour and a half late because I knew I was moving to that last part. And I got it. And so I was able to eat on a clear conscience.
That's great. I may or may not know the answer to this next question with you, but you know, a lot's happened in film since Stonewall and where this book leaves off.
Sure.
Is there any possibility of a sequel to this book?
I don't know. I feel like so much of what's come since then has been written about. And maybe this is because I'm an old fogey. The earlier cinema tends to speak to me more. You know, we're all going to find our own levels with this, I think. And you are remarkably ecumenical in the people you interview and the people whose careers you analyze. I feel like there's a reason that I wrote so much about the year 1929. I'm thinking in a previous life, I must have thrived there. And no, I was not born in 1929. I very proudly say that. So I doubt it. If someone came to me, a couple of my books were not of my volition. I had a publisher approach me, which is a wonderful feeling. Mm-hmm. If I were asked, I'd give it a whirl. But I think a lot of the writers who have written about the later films have done so brilliantly. And they do so in a way that I think a lot of people in earlier years did not have the insight and maybe the tools to do. So at this point, I'm happy to go back and talk about the history, even what was happening before I was born. I think it can still be talked about and argued about a lot.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad to do that.
And are you able to tell us what you're currently working on?
No. No, I am working on something, and I am in intensive collusion, I should say, with an editor about a project, and I've been doing some work on it. And right at the moment, I'm waiting to hear back from the editor about how do we move ahead with this. So when I know, is it all right if I tell you when I know it? I've told a couple of neighbors, and that's it, because I feel like you don't like to jinx it.
No.
Especially, you want to sign the contract first.
Right.
But it is something that takes me out of some of my accustomed territory. And I like being stretched. I think it's, it's broadening. It keeps you young. And at this point, I like to be kept young,
Well, me too.
Absolutely.
I hope that you had a great time today. And
I had a wonderful time. As everyone knows, you are this great person to talk to.
Oh,
you remind me of the guy that the first time I did an audio commentary for a DVD, I had never met the guy before, but they said, okay, the two of you together are going to do it. And we talked for like 5 minutes, and then they turned the mic on. And it just went on like a house on fire. It's the DVD of State Fair, the 1945. So play it and you will hear it. You're like that. You're just you have an instant rapport with people. I'm very grateful for that, because some interviewers, you kind of have to make bricks without straw.
And thank you for saying that. I say that not that I'm fishing for compliments, but my hope is that you had such a great time that when that next project is ready, that you will come back and be with me.
Oh, I'm always glad. If you ever feel like talking about some of my other books, I can do that.
Yeah,
I'm always happy to do this kind of thing. And it's funny, if I can say this quickly. Yes. I thought, I haven't done anything with Screened Out in a while. So do I need to go back and I thought, I'm so used to autopilot kicking on when I get asked questions, and I knew you were going to ask good questions, and I thought, well, yeah, you. So I did very, very little boning up for this because I knew you were going to have good questions, and it always kind of sits up here. A lot of things that happened yesterday, no longer sit up here, but all that stuff does. So thank you for bringing it out. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Don't go away for a moment. I want to thank everybody for being here today. As I've said on all of my shows, I don't take for granted that you could have been anywhere else for the last hour. And the fact that you decided to spend it with us is something that I do not take for granted. So thank you all. If you had a great time today, if this is your first time here, please, please, please subscribe to Richard Skipper Celebrates. I am on YouTube. I'm all about celebrating other artists. And we are on the precipice of Gay Pride Month. All the month of June, I'm going to be celebrating LGBTQ movers and shakers. So each day throughout the month, please come back, be a part of that. If you liked today's show, and I hope you did, please hit the like button, leave a comment, because that helps in terms of the ranking of this video. And the more comments and likes we get, the more that more people will see this and more people will buy the book. Now, I end every show, we're going to give you a resurgence with this book. I always end every show by telling you we want to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. Go to your Facebook friends list. See, he or she agrees with me. Go to your Facebook friends list, and the third name that pops up, order 2 copies of this book, keep one for yourself, and send it to your third friend. Whether
they make great gifts.
They make great gifts, and whether they are straight, gay, or whatever they want to celebrate, this is our history, and it needs to be taught. It needs to be learned about. It needs to be celebrated. And reach out to your friends. As a dear friend of mine says, we're all in this together, but we're not in the same boat. But if you're going to be in a boat, make sure you bring a skipper along. Think about that.
There you go. There you go.
Now, Richard, I'm going to leave the screen because this is about you. You've got the platform to yourself. Anything that you want to say about anything that we talked about today that you want to expound upon, anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had, or just any message that you want to put out to anyone who's watching now, it's yours. And thank you so much. You're the best.
Thank you. I would just like to say, as Pride Month commences, and what an honor and a privilege it's been for me and my senior here who climbed up on my lap throughout the whole interview. What a privilege it's been with Richard to kick off Pride Month. And I loved writing about our history. And as I said during the show, if you want to know where we're going, have a look at where we've been. And that gives you a good indicator. I think we've come a long way. I think in so many ways, in so many aspects of our lives, I think we have a long way to go. But I'm grateful for the ride. I'm grateful I've been able to contribute a little something to it. And thank you all for watching today. It means a lot to me. Thank you again, Richard, for inviting me. It's been a real treat, and God bless you all.